A group of soldiers found an old trunk sealed since World War II. The army said to destroy it without looking inside. But when they opened it at midnight, they discovered something that made no sense. Something that science couldn't explain. James Miller was 65 years old and tired. He'd been in the army for 40 years, working in storage and supply. Now he was 3 months from retirement, just trying to finish his time quietly. His job was simple: go through old military storage buildings and decide what to keep and what to throw away. Most of it was junk. Uniforms from wars nobody remembered. Equipment that didn't work anymore. Papers that had turned yellow with age. But this trunk was different. James found it in the back corner of a storage building at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. The building was scheduled to be torn down, so everything inside had to be moved or destroyed. The trunk sat alone, covered in dust so thick you could write your name in it. It was made of heavy metal, painted army green, and it had a lock that looked like it hadn't been opened in a very long time. James called over his assistant, a young soldier named Marcus Webb. Marcus was 23, fresh out of training, eager to help. Together they brushed off the dust. They found markings on the trunk, numbers and letters stamped into the metal, and a date that made James stop and stare. April 15, 1945. This trunk had been locked for 80 years. "Sergeant Miller, should we open it?" Marcus pulled out his phone to take pictures. James wasn't sure. There were rules about old military equipment. Some things were supposed to stay sealed. Dangerous chemicals, explosives, things that could hurt you if you weren't careful. But this was just a trunk. What harm could there be? "Let me check the records first." James went back to his office and looked up the numbers stamped on the trunk. What he found made no sense. According to the records, this trunk had been sealed on April 15, 1945 at a base in Virginia. The same day President Roosevelt's funeral train left Washington. The trunk was marked as personal effects, which meant someone's belongings. But there was no name. No information about who it belonged to or why it was locked. Just a note in red ink: "Do not open. Store indefinitely. Authority of General Westbrook." James had never heard of General Westbrook. He searched but found nothing. No records of anyone by that name in 1945. It was like the general didn't exist. But someone with authority had ordered this trunk sealed and stored forever. For 80 years, soldiers had moved it from base to base, storage building to storage building, never opening it, never asking why, just following orders that were 8 decades old. Marcus found James staring at his computer screen. "What did you find?" James showed him the records. Marcus read them twice. "That's weird. Why would they seal someone's belongings and never tell anyone whose they were? That's what I want to know." James made a decision. "We're opening it, but carefully, and we document everything. If there's something dangerous inside, we need proof we followed safety rules." They waited until late that night. James didn't want other soldiers around if something went wrong. He and Marcus met at the storage building at 11 o'clock. They brought tools to break the lock, cameras to record everything, and safety gear just in case. The building was dark and cold. Their flashlights made strange shadows on the walls. The trunk sat where they'd left it, looking innocent and dangerous at the same time. Marcus set up his phone to record video. James put on thick gloves and safety glasses. He used bolt cutters on the lock. It was so old and rusted that it broke easily. The trunk's lid was harder. It hadn't moved in 80 years. The hinges were frozen. James had to use a crowbar to pry it open. When the lid finally lifted, they both stepped back, waiting to see what was inside, waiting for something to explode or leak or make them sick. Nothing happened. James aimed his flashlight into the trunk. What he saw made him confused. The trunk was full of ordinary things: a military uniform, neatly folded, a pair of boots, some books, a photograph in a frame, personal items like the records had said. But why seal them? Why mark them secret? James lifted out the uniform carefully. It was old-style army dress uniform from World War II, clean and preserved. No name tag, no medals or pins, just plain uniform. The boots were the same, standard army issue from the 1940s. Nothing special about them. Marcus picked up the photograph. It showed a young soldier, maybe 20 years old, standing next to a woman in a white dress, both of them smiling. A wedding picture, James guessed. But there was something strange. The photograph looked wrong somehow. The people in it seemed too clear, too sharp. like it had been taken yesterday, not 80 years ago. Before you find out what they discovered next, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We have more incredible stories coming that will amaze you. James found the books, 3 of them, hardcover, well preserved. He opened the first one and his confusion grew. It was a diary, written in neat handwriting. But the dates made no sense. The diary started on April 16, 1945, the day after this trunk was sealed. How could someone write about events after their belongings were locked away? James read the first entry out loud. His voice echoed in the dark building. Today I attended my own funeral. Nobody could see me. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I watched my wife cry, watched my mother collapse. They think I'm dead, but I'm standing right there, and they can't see me. I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand what I've become. James stopped reading, looked at Marcus. The young soldier's face was pale. Sergeant, this doesn't make sense. How can someone write about attending their own funeral? James didn't have an answer. He kept reading. The diary went on for pages. The writer described being invisible, described trying to touch things but his hands going through them, described watching his family mourn while he stood beside them, unable to make them see or hear him. It read like the story of a ghost, but it was written in a diary, in a trunk, sealed by the Army, and hidden for 80 years. Marcus picked up the second book. It was also a diary, but different handwriting. This one started on April 20th, 1945, 4 days after the first one. The writer described the same thing, being invisible, being unable to touch anything solid, watching people but unable to interact with them. And at the end of the first entry, something that made James's hands shake. I found him today. The other one, the soldier who disappeared on April 15th. He can see me. We can see each other, but nobody else can see either of us. The third book was different. Not a diary, but a report. Official military language, typed on an old typewriter. James read it and felt cold despite his heavy coat. The report was from General Westbrook, the general who didn't exist in any records. The report described an experiment, something the Army had been testing in April 1945. A device meant to make soldiers invisible in combat. A machine that could bend light or change matter. The report was vague about how it worked, but it was clear about what went wrong. 2 soldiers had volunteered for the test. They'd been exposed to the device, and they'd vanished. Completely disappeared. The Army searched for them for 3 days. Then they showed up, or their belongings showed up. The uniform, boots, books, and photograph appeared in the testing room. Just appeared, like someone had placed them there. But nobody saw anyone enter the room. The diary entries explained what happened. The soldiers hadn't died. They'd been changed, turned into something that couldn't be seen or touched, something that existed but didn't exist at the same time. The Army didn't know how to fix it, didn't know how to bring them back. So General Westbrook had made a decision. Seal the evidence, hide the experiment, pretend it never happened. James closed the report and looked at Marcus. This is impossible. People don't become invisible. That only happens in movies. Marcus pointed at the trunk. Then where did this come from? Who wrote those diaries? And why did the Army hide it for 80 years? James didn't have answers. He took out his phone to call his commander, to report what they'd found. But before he could dial, something happened that made both men freeze. The trunk moved, just a little, like someone had bumped it. But James and Marcus were both standing 5 feet away. Nobody had touched it. They watched as the photograph lifted out of the trunk by itself, floated in the air, turned slowly like invisible hands were examining it. Then it set back down gently. Marcus grabbed James's arm. Did you see that? Something just picked up that photograph. James saw it, but he didn't believe it. Objects didn't move by themselves. There had to be an explanation. A breeze, maybe, or the building settling. Then they heard it, a voice, faint and distant, like it was coming from far away. But the words were clear. Thank you for opening it. Thank you for finding us. We've been waiting so long. Someone to finally see the truth. James and Marcus ran out of that storage building faster than either of them had moved in years. They didn't stop until they were outside in the parking lot, breathing hard, hearts pounding. They looked back at the building. It looked normal, just an old storage building, but inside was a trunk, and inside that trunk was evidence of something impossible. something the Army had hidden for 80 years, something that science couldn't explain. And now, two soldiers who'd been invisible for 8 decades were trying to communicate, trying to tell their story, trying to be seen again after all this time. James knew he should report this, follow protocol, let his commanders handle it. But he also knew what would happen. The trunk would disappear. The evidence would be destroyed. The truth would stay buried, just like it had been for 80 years. And those two invisible soldiers would stay invisible forever. James made a decision right there in the parking lot. He was too old and too tired to care about rules anymore. Tomorrow he'd go back, open that trunk again, read all 3 books, and figure out what really happened in April 1945. Figure out if those 2 soldiers could somehow be saved, or at least have their story told. James didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about the voice, the photograph floating in the air, the diaries written by men who claimed to be invisible. At 6 in the morning, he gave up on sleep, made coffee and called Marcus. The young soldier answered after 1 ring. "Sergeant Miller, I've been awake all night. What we saw, that was real, right? I'm not crazy. You're not crazy." James took a drink of his coffee. "I saw it too. We're going back today. We need to read those diaries completely. Figure out what happened." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What if they're still there? The invisible soldiers? What if they try to talk to us again? Then we listen." James said it firmly. "If those men have been trapped for 80 years, the least we can do is hear their story." They met at the storage building at 7. Daylight made everything look normal, less scary than it had been at night. But James still felt nervous as they walked inside. The trunk sat where they'd left it, lid open, contents visible. Nothing had moved. No floating photographs, no mysterious voices. "Maybe we imagined it," Marcus said hopefully. "Maybe it was just stress or bad lighting or something." James picked up the first diary. "We didn't imagine these. These are real. Let's read them all. Figure out what happened." They spent the next 4 hours reading. The first diary was written by Private Thomas Chen, age 21, married 3 weeks before the experiment. The diary described his excitement about the test, how the Army scientists said they were developing something amazing, something that would save American lives. The experiment happened on April 15, 1945. Thomas and another soldier, Private William Foster, had volunteered. They'd been told it was safe. Just a test of new equipment. They stood in a room while scientists turned on a machine. Thomas described a bright light, a sound like thunder. Then everything changed. He could see the scientists, could see William, but the scientists couldn't see them. Thomas tried to speak, tried to touch the machine. His hands went through everything like he was made of air. The scientists panicked, searched the room, called for help, but Thomas and William stood right there, invisible. They followed the scientists out, watched the Army search the base, heard them report the 2 soldiers as missing, heard General Westbrook order the search stopped. The general said the experiment was classified. The missing soldiers were a security risk. Their families would be told they died in training. The Army would pretend the experiment never happened. Marcus looked up from reading. "That's horrible. They just abandoned them? Left them invisible?" James nodded. "Keep reading. It gets worse." The second diary was William's. His writing was harder to read, more emotional. William had a daughter, 2 years old. He described going home, standing in his own living room, watching his wife cry, watching his daughter ask where Daddy was, being right there but unable to answer, unable to hold his child. William tried everything, tried to write notes, but his invisible hands couldn't hold a pen properly, tried to move objects, but he couldn't touch anything solid. He and Thomas stayed together. They could see and hear each other. That was their only comfort. 2 invisible men, trapped between existing and not existing. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. They watched the war end, watched their families move on, watched the world change around them while they stayed frozen. If you're wondering what happened to these soldiers, smash that like button and share this story with your friends. Then something changed. After 3 months, they started to feel different, stronger somehow. Thomas discovered he could touch things if he concentrated hard enough, could move small objects. William learned the same trick. It took enormous effort, left them exhausted, but they could do it. They practiced, got better. After 6 months, they could pick up books, write with pens, move photographs. They decided to send a message, to let the army know they were still there, still alive, in whatever form they'd become. They gathered their belongings, uniform, boots, books, used all their strength to move them into the room where the experiment had happened. Then they waited, hoping someone would find the items and understand. The army found the items the next morning. General Westbrook examined everything, read the diary entries Thomas and William had written. The general looked scared. He ordered the items sealed in a trunk, marked it secret, had it stored where nobody would find it. That's when Thomas and William realized the truth. The army wasn't going to help them, wasn't going to try to fix what they'd done. The general wanted the experiment buried and forgotten, wanted the two invisible soldiers to stay invisible forever. The diaries described their despair, described years of watching the world but being unable to be part of it, watching their families age, watching their children grow up without them, being ghosts, but worse than ghosts. Because ghosts could at least rest. They were stuck, aware, invisible, forever. James closed the second diary. His hands were shaking. Marcus, this is real. These men have been trapped for 80 years. We have to help them. How? Marcus's voice cracked. How do we help invisible people? We don't even know if they're still alive, or whatever they are. James picked up the third book, the general's report. Maybe this has answers. How the experiment worked, how to reverse it. He read carefully. The report was written in complicated language, technical terms he didn't understand. But the basic idea was simple. The machine used some kind of energy to change how matter existed, made it shift into a different state. The scientists thought they could make soldiers invisible for short periods, send them behind enemy lines. Perfect spying. But they'd miscalculated. The effect was permanent. Thomas and William were stuck in this changed state. The report said there was no way to reverse it. The scientists had tried, built another machine, tried different settings. Nothing worked. General Westbrook concluded that the two soldiers were lost. He recommended ending all research into the technology, destroying the machines, classifying everything. His final note was chilling. The potential benefits do not justify the risks. We must ensure this technology is never developed again. 2 lives lost is tragic. Thousands lost would be unforgivable. This experiment must be forgotten. James set down the report. His anger surprised him. The general gave up on them, just decided they were acceptable losses and moved on. Marcus was reading the last pages of William's diary. Sergeant, you need to see this. The final entry was dated December 1945, 8 months after the experiment. William wrote that he and Thomas had made a decision. They couldn't change what happened to them, couldn't force the army to help, but they could leave evidence, make sure someone eventually knew the truth. So they wrote everything down, every detail of the experiment, every day of being invisible, every moment of watching their families grieve. They put the diaries, the uniform, the photograph, everything into a trunk, used all their strength to do it. Then they wrote one final message. To whoever finds this, we are still here, still invisible, still trapped. We don't know if we'll exist forever or if we'll eventually fade away. But please tell our families we didn't die. Tell them we were victims of an experiment. Tell them we loved them until the end, whenever that comes. Signed, Private Thomas Chen and Private William Foster. James felt tears on his face. He hadn't cried in 20 years, but this broke something in him. 2 young soldiers, trapped and abandoned, waiting 80 years for someone to find their story. We have to tell people. We have to let their families know what happened. Marcus nodded. But who do we tell? If we go to our commanders, they'll bury this again, just like the general did. James thought about that, thought about chain of command and following orders. He'd spent 40 years obeying rules, but some things were more important than rules. We tell everyone. James made his decision. Newspapers, television, the internet. We make this public before anyone can stop us. Marcus looked scared. They'll court-martial us, kick us out. We could go to prison for revealing classified information. Probably. James smiled despite everything. But I'm retiring in 3 months anyway. And you're young. You'll survive this. Those 2 soldiers deserve their story told. That matters more than our careers. They took pictures of everything. The trunk, the diaries, the report. Uploaded them to Marcus's computer. Made copies. Sent them to multiple news organizations. By that afternoon, the story was spreading. By evening, it was national news. 80-year-old military experiment. 2 soldiers made invisible. Army covered it up. The public reaction was massive. Outrage at the cover-up, sympathy for the soldiers, demands for investigation. James and Marcus were arrested the next morning. Military police, very polite but firm. They were taken to the base commander's office. The commander, Colonel Sarah Martinez, was furious. "Do you two have any idea what you've done? You've released classified information, started a public scandal, destroyed your careers." James stood at attention. "Yes, ma'am. But those soldiers deserve their story told." Colonel Martinez stared at him. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled, sat down, gestured for them to sit too. "Off the record? I'm glad you did it. That experiment should never have been hidden. Those families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. But now we have a mess to deal with, and I need your help cleaning it up." "What kind of help?" Marcus asked nervously. The colonel pulled out a file. "We need to find Thomas Chen's and William Foster's families, tell them the truth, and we need to figure out if those 2 soldiers are still out there somewhere, still invisible, still trapped." James thought about the voice they'd heard, the photograph that moved. "I think they are. I think they're still waiting for someone to finally see them." Colonel Martinez nodded. "Then let's try. Let's see if we can finish what should have been done 80 years ago. Let's bring those soldiers home." Finding the families took 3 days. Thomas Chen's wife had died in 1989, but he had a daughter. Linda Chen was 78 years old and living in California. She'd been 2 years old when her father disappeared, had no memories of him, just photographs and her mother's stories. William Foster's family was harder to find. His daughter, the 2-year-old he'd written about, had died in 2010. But she'd had children. William's grandchildren were still alive. Colonel Martinez arranged meetings. Linda Chen flew to Fort Campbell. William's grandson, Robert Foster, drove from Tennessee. They met in a private room on the base. James and Marcus were there. So was a team of scientists who'd been studying the old reports. Linda Chen was small and thin. She looked like her father. Same eyes, same smile. She held the photograph from the trunk, her parents' wedding picture. "I never knew what happened to him. Mom said he died in training, but she always seemed sad about it, like there was more to the story." Robert Foster was 55, a teacher. He'd grown up hearing stories about the grandfather who disappeared in World War II. Family legend said he'd been on a secret mission. Nobody knew details. Now I know why. Robert's voice was angry. The Army made him invisible and then just gave up on him. Left him trapped for 80 years. Colonel Martinez didn't make excuses. "What happened was wrong. We can't fix it. But we're trying to do right by your family members now. We want to find them, or find out what happened to them." One of the scientists, Dr. Amy Walsh, spoke up. She was maybe 40, spoke gently. "We've been studying the reports. The technology used was experimental, something called quantum field manipulation. Basically, they tried to shift matter into a different state of existence. The soldiers didn't become truly invisible. They were shifted slightly out of phase with normal reality." Linda frowned. "I don't understand. What does that mean?" Dr. Walsh tried again. "Think of reality like a radio. We all exist on one frequency. The machine shifted your father and William to a different frequency. They could see and hear us, but we couldn't see or hear them, unless we had equipment tuned to their frequency." "Can you build that equipment?" James asked. "Can you make something that would let us see them?" Dr. Walsh hesitated. "Maybe. The old reports give us enough information to try. But understand, this happened 80 years ago. We don't know if they're still there. Don't know if they've faded away or moved on or what. We might build the equipment and find nothing." Robert leaned forward. "But we have to try, right? We can't just leave them there." Colonel Martinez nodded. "We're going to try. But I need everyone to understand this will take time. Could be months, could be years, and we might fail." Linda touched the photograph, her father's young face smiling. "Mom waited her whole life to know what happened. I can wait a little longer." The team started working immediately. Dr. Walsh brought in specialists, engineers, physicists, people who understood things James couldn't even pronounce. They studied the old reports, tried to recreate the machine that had caused this mess. Not to make more people invisible, but to build something that could detect those who were invisible, see them, hear them, maybe even touch them. 3 months passed. James retired from the army but stayed involved. He felt responsible somehow, like he'd made a promise to those two soldiers when he opened their trunk. Marcus was court-martialed, but received a light sentence, 30 days in jail and a dishonorable discharge. He said it was worth it. The public attention helped. Congress ordered investigations. Laws were changed requiring disclosure of old experiments. Families of other soldiers who disappeared in secret tests came forward. It became a movement. Truth and accountability for military secrets. But James only cared about Thomas and William, two young soldiers who'd trusted their country and been betrayed. Dr. Walsh called him in June. "Mr. Miller, we've built a prototype. It's crude, but it might work. Want to be there when we test it?" James drove to Fort Campbell. They'd set up equipment in the same storage building where he'd found the trunk. The trunk itself was there too, open, contents laid out like a memorial. Dr. Walsh had built something that looked like a camera attached to a computer. This detects quantum fluctuations. If Thomas and William are still phased out of normal reality, this should pick them up. She turned on the equipment, pointed it at the trunk. The computer screen showed the storage building, but different, like looking through water. Shapes moved on the screen, blurry at first, then clearer. James stopped breathing. There were two figures standing beside the trunk, human-shaped, watching the equipment. Dr. Walsh made adjustments. The shapes became clearer. Two men in old army uniforms. Young men, looking exactly like they had in 1945. One reached toward the camera. The screen flickered. Then words appeared, typed out like someone was using the computer. "Can you see us?" Dr. Walsh's hands shook as she typed back. "Yes, we can see you. Are you Thomas Chen and William Foster?" The response came quickly. "Yes, we've been waiting. 80 years. You finally found a way to see us." James felt his throat tighten. The shapes on the screen looked tired, faded somehow, like they'd been waiting too long. He spoke aloud, not sure if they could hear. "Your families are here. Your daughter Thomas, your grandson William. They know what happened. They know you didn't abandon them." The shapes moved, came closer to the camera. More words appeared. "Thank you. We thought everyone had forgotten. Thought we'd be invisible forever." Linda Chen had been standing back, crying quietly. Now she moved forward. "Daddy, can you hear me? It's Linda, your daughter." The response took longer this time. "Linda, you're grown. You're old. How is that possible?" "It's only been a few months," Dr. Walsh explained gently. "Time passes differently for them. In their phase state, they experience time much slower. For them, it's only been a few months. For us, it's been 80 years. If you want to know what happened to these soldiers, hit that like button and share this with everyone who believes in doing what's right." Robert Foster stepped forward. "Grandfather, I'm Robert, your grandson. Your daughter passed away 15 years ago, but she told us about you. Told us to never stop wondering what happened." The words on the screen came slower, sadder. "My daughter is dead. My wife is dead. Everyone I knew is gone. We've been invisible so long, there's nothing left to come back to." James felt desperation. "No, that's not true. Your families are here. Your story matters. We can help you. We can bring you back." Dr. Walsh interrupted. "Actually, we can't. Not yet. The equipment to see them is working. But reversing the phase shift would require energy we don't have, technology we haven't invented. It could take years, maybe decades." The shapes on the screen moved away from the camera. The words appeared one final time. "We're tired. We've existed in this state for what feels like months to us but is 80 years to you. We don't want to wait decades more. We just want to rest." Then they faded from the screen. Dr. Walsh tried everything, adjusted the equipment, changed settings. But the soldiers were gone. Not dead, just withdrawn, refusing to engage. James understood. They'd held on for 80 years, hoping to be saved. Now they knew salvation was still years away. Maybe impossible. Who could blame them for giving up? Linda cried harder. "I finally found my father and he's giving up." Robert put his arm around her. "We have to keep trying. Keep working on the technology. Show them we won't abandon them again." Over the next 2 years, Dr. Walsh's team worked on reversing the phase shift. They made progress. Slow progress. Meanwhile, they kept the detection equipment running in the storage building. Sometimes the soldiers would appear on screen. Brief glimpses. Never communicating, just watching, waiting. James visited every week, talked to them even when they didn't respond, told them about the modern world, about their families, about how their story had changed things, how hundreds of families were getting answers about disappeared soldiers, how laws had been changed because of them. He hoped they could hear, hoped it mattered. Linda and Robert visited too, talked to fathers and grandfathers they'd never known, shared family stories, brought photos. The soldiers never responded, but sometimes they'd move closer to the camera, like they were listening, like it mattered. 3 years after James found the trunk, Dr. Walsh made a breakthrough. She called everyone to the base. Her team had developed something new, not a way to bring the soldiers back fully, but a way to stabilize them, make them visible without changing their phase state. It's not perfect, she explained. They'll still be stuck between states, but at least they'll be visible, able to interact with the world, not trapped in isolation anymore. James thought about that. Still trapped but visible. Was that better or worse? Linda Chen made the decision. At least they wouldn't be alone. At least they could see their families, experience the world. That has to be better than 80 years of invisible isolation. They set up the new equipment. Dr. Walsh powered it on. The soldiers appeared on screen. James spoke to them. Thomas, William, we have something new. Something that can make you visible again. Not fully human, but visible, able to interact. Do you want to try? The soldiers looked at each other on the screen. Words appeared. Will it hurt? Dr. Walsh answered. I don't know, but it's your choice. We won't force you. More words. And our families? We could see them, touch them. Linda stepped forward. Yes, please. I want to know my father, even if it's not normal, even if it's strange. I just want to know him. The shapes on the screen moved closer. Final words appeared. 80 years is long enough to be invisible. Whatever happens, it can't be worse than this. Try it. Dr. Walsh activated the equipment. The room filled with light and sound. When it cleared, 2 men stood in the storage building. Young men in old uniforms. Solid-looking but slightly transparent. Like projections, but real. Moving. Breathing. Looking around with wonder. Thomas saw Linda and froze. You're my daughter? You're so old. Linda laughed through tears. You're my father. You're so young. They hugged. It was awkward. Thomas felt solid but cold. Not quite real, but real enough. William's grandson approached. Grandfather? I'm Robert. William studied him. You have your grandmother's eyes. She was so beautiful. Robert smiled. I know. We have pictures. I'll show you everything. The soldiers looked at each other, at the world they could finally see and touch after 80 years of isolation. Thomas spoke aloud for the first time. His voice sounded distant but clear. Thank you, all of you, for not forgetting us, for bringing us back, even if it's just partly. James felt his own tears. Welcome home, soldiers. Welcome home. The army didn't know what to do with 2 soldiers who were visible but not quite alive. Not quite dead either. Existing in a state that shouldn't be possible. Colonel Martinez made an unusual decision. We give them lives. Whatever kind of lives they can have in this state. They've served long enough. They deserve peace. Thomas and William were given housing on the base. Small apartments where they could stay. The apartments felt strange to them. Everything was strange. The modern world was nothing like 1945. Cars looked different. Buildings looked different. Even the way people talked was different. Linda Chen visited her father every day, brought photographs of his life, his wife's wedding ring, stories about the family he'd never known. Thomas listened to everything with sadness and wonder. His daughter was an old woman. His wife had died 30 years ago. His whole world was gone. But Linda was there. His little girl, grown up and old but still his daughter. They talked for hours. Linda told him about her childhood, her mother's sadness, how she'd always wondered about her father. Thomas told her about being invisible, about watching the world change, about the loneliness. One day Linda asked the hard question, Dad, are you happy? Being visible now? Or is this worse than being invisible? Thomas thought for a long time. It's better because I can see you, talk to you, know you. But it's also harder. Being invisible, I didn't have to face what I'd lost. Now I see it every day. Everyone I knew is dead. Everything I knew is gone. I'm a ghost pretending to be alive. Linda held his cold, almost transparent hand. "You're my father. That's all that matters to me." William had similar conversations with Robert. His grandson brought William's daughter's belongings, photographs, letters, a diary where she'd written about missing her father. William cried reading it. His daughter had grown up, had children, had died never knowing what happened to him. That hurt more than 80 years of being invisible. Robert tried to help, showed William the modern world, computers, internet, cell phones. William was amazed and overwhelmed. In his time, television was new. Now people carried computers in their pockets, talked to anyone in the world instantly. It was too much to process. But Robert was patient, taught him slowly, spent time getting to know the grandfather he'd never met. The soldier's situation became news again. Not scandal this time, but human interest. 2 men from World War II, brought back, but not quite alive. People were fascinated. Documentary makers wanted interviews. Authors wanted to write books. Thomas and William agreed to some of it, told their story, explained what being invisible had been like, warned about military experiments and the cost of secrecy. Their message resonated, particularly with veterans, other soldiers who'd been test subjects for experiments, Agent Orange, radiation, chemical weapons, men who'd served their country and been damaged by it. Thomas and William became symbols, proof that the government owed responsibility to the soldiers it harmed. Congress passed new laws, more protection for test subjects, more compensation for victims of military experiments, better oversight to prevent future abuses. James Miller watched it all with pride. He'd retired but stayed involved, checked on the soldiers regularly, considered them friends despite the strangeness of their existence. One day Thomas asked him a question that had been bothering him. "Mr. Miller, what happens to us now? We can't age, can't die. We're stuck like this forever?" James didn't have an answer. Dr. Walsh was researching that, trying to understand their state of existence. She explained it to all of them one afternoon. "You're in what we call a stable quantum state. Your matter exists in a different phase than normal. You appear solid, but you're not fully integrated with normal reality. You don't age because time affects you differently. You don't need food or sleep for the same reason." Linda asked the question everyone was thinking. Will they exist forever? Dr. Walsh hesitated. "We don't know. This is unprecedented. They might exist indefinitely, or they might eventually fade away. We're monitoring them constantly, trying to understand, but it's possible they'll outlive all of us." Thomas and William looked at each other. That thought terrified them. Existing forever while everyone they knew died, watching generation after generation pass, never able to truly live but never able to die. William spoke what they were both thinking. "That's not a gift, that's a curse. We've already been trapped for 80 years. We don't want to be trapped for eternity." Dr. Walsh was gentle. "I understand. We're working on options. Ways to either fully restore you to normal existence or, if you choose, ways to end your existence peacefully. Nobody should be forced to live forever against their will." The conversation made everyone quiet and sad. James understood their fear. Being alive forever sounded good until you thought about what it really meant. Watching everyone you loved die, never resting, never having peace. That was torture, not blessing. Over the next year, Dr. Walsh made progress. She developed a treatment that could theoretically shift them back to normal existence. But it was dangerous. Might work, might kill them, might make things worse. The soldiers had to decide what they wanted. Thomas and William talked for days. Linda and Robert were part of the conversations. So was James. Everyone had opinions about what the soldiers should do. Try the treatment, stay as they were, or choose to end their existence peacefully before it became torture. Thomas finally made his feelings clear. "I've been alive since 1923. I'm 102 years old even though I look 21. I've experienced more than most people, seen my daughter grow old, told my story, made peace with what happened. If this treatment might let me die naturally, I want to try it, even if it means dying tomorrow." William agreed. "We've existed in an impossible state for 80 years. We're tired. If there's a chance to become normal again, even for a short time before we die, that's worth the risk. We want to try." Linda cried but understood. Robert held his grandfather's cold hand. "Whatever you choose, we support you." Dr. Walsh scheduled the treatment for a month later, gave everyone time to prepare. Time to say goodbye, just in case. The soldiers spent that month living as much as they could. Thomas went to his wife's grave. She was buried in California. He stood by her headstone and talked to her, told her everything that happened, apologized for leaving her alone for so long. Linda took her father to places her mother had loved, showed him photographs of every birthday, every holiday, every important moment he'd missed. Thomas treasured all of it, memorized every image, every story. William went to his daughter's grave, too. She was buried in Tennessee. Robert brought flowers and they stood together. 3 generations, but only 2 were truly alive. William talked about his daughter's childhood, the 2 years he'd known her before the experiment. Robert shared stories about his mother, her kindness, her sadness about her missing father, her hope that someday the truth would be known. William cried, "My little girl grew up without me, had her own children, died never knowing I was nearby, invisible, watching over her the whole time." Robert's voice was thick with emotion. "She knew you loved her? Grandma made sure of that. She told Mom every day that her father was a hero, that he'd died serving his country. Now we know she was half right. You didn't die, but you were a hero." The day of the treatment arrived. Dr. Walsh had set up equipment in a medical building on base. The process was complicated. Would take hours, might work, might fail. The soldiers had signed papers accepting the risk. Linda and Robert were there. So were James and Colonel Martinez. Everyone who'd been part of this strange journey. Thomas went first. He lay on a medical bed surrounded by machines. Dr. Walsh explained what would happen. "We're going to gradually shift your quantum state, bring you back into phase with normal reality. It will be painful. Your body hasn't experienced normal physical sensations in 80 years. Everything will feel intense." Thomas nodded. "I understand. I'm ready." Dr. Walsh started the machines. The room filled with sound and light. Thomas screamed. His body convulsed. Linda grabbed James's arm, terrified. It looked like her father was dying, but Dr. Walsh kept working, adjusting equipment, monitoring readings. Slowly, Thomas began to look more solid, less transparent, more real. The treatment took 3 hours. When it finished, Thomas lay still on the bed. Everyone held their breath. Then he moved, sat up slowly, looked at his hands. They were solid, completely solid. He touched his face, felt tears. Real tears, not the cold, almost tears he'd had before. If you're wondering if these soldiers survived, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. It worked. Thomas's voice sounded different, warmer, more human. "I can feel everything. The bed, the air, my heart beating. I'm real again." Linda rushed forward and hugged him. This time he felt warm, alive, completely solid. Thomas hugged her back and cried, real crying. 80 years of trapped emotion finally released. Dr. Walsh checked her equipment. "Mr. Chen, you're fully integrated with normal reality now. You're human again. But understand, you're still 102 years old. Your body just doesn't look it yet. That will change. You'll age rapidly over the next few weeks. Your body will catch up to your real age." Thomas nodded. He understood. He'd have days, maybe weeks, as a normal human. Then he'd die of old age. But that was better than existing forever as a ghost. William went next. His treatment took 4 hours. Longer because his quantum state was less stable. But it worked. He became solid, real, human again. Robert hugged his grandfather for the first time. Really hugged him, feeling warmth and life. "Grandfather, you're back." William smiled through tears. "For a little while. That's all I need. A little while to be human before I rest." Both soldiers were given rooms in the hospital, monitored constantly as their bodies began aging. Dr. Walsh had been right. Their 100-year-old bodies started catching up. Within days, they looked 50. Within 2 weeks, they looked 80. Their energy faded. Moving became harder. But they were happy. Linda spent every moment with her father. They talked about everything. Made up for 80 years of missed conversations. Thomas told her he was proud. Proud of the woman she'd become. The life she'd built, the strength she'd shown. Linda told him she loved him, had always loved him, even when he was just a photograph in her mother's stories. William spent his time with Robert, teaching his grandson things, talking about World War II, about what life had been like in the 1940s, about meeting his grandmother. Robert recorded everything, made sure his grandfather's stories would survive. 3 weeks after the treatment, Thomas became very weak. The doctor said his body was shutting down. Natural old age. Linda stayed by his bed, held his hand. "Dad, are you scared?" Thomas smiled. "No, I'm tired. I've been tired for 80 years. It's time to rest." He closed his eyes that night and didn't wake up. Linda held his hand as he died. Really died this time. Not vanishing into invisible existence, but dying peacefully. Naturally. His funeral was full. Soldiers. Veterans. People who'd followed his story. Linda spoke at the service. Talked about finally knowing her father. About 3 weeks of precious time that made up for 80 years of loss. William lasted 1 more week. He spent it with Robert and Robert's children. William's great-grandchildren. He told them about their family, about being a soldier, about the importance of truth and accountability. His last words were to Robert. "Tell them I tried. Tell them I never stopped trying to come home." Robert promised. William died peacefully, surrounded by family. His funeral was like Thomas's, full of people who'd been touched by his story. Robert spoke about his grandfather's courage, about enduring 80 years of impossible existence just to tell the truth, about sacrificing everything for his country and getting nothing back until it was too late. James Miller stood at both funerals. Old now himself, almost 80. He thought about the trunk he'd found, about 2 diaries and a decision to tell the truth, about how opening that locked trunk had changed everything. The soldiers were buried with full military honors. Their names were added to memorials. Their service recognized officially after 80 years of being erased. Linda and Robert established a foundation, the Chen Foster Truth Foundation. Its purpose was helping families of soldiers who disappeared in military experiments, making sure no one else was forgotten the way their fathers and grandfathers had been. James worked with the foundation until he died 5 years later. He'd opened a trunk and found 2 invisible soldiers. He'd helped bring them home. That mattered more than 40 years of following orders. That meant something. Dr. Walsh continued her research. She'd proven that quantum phase shifting was possible, that people could exist in impossible states, that sometimes science fiction was just science that hadn't been understood yet. But she also proved something more important, that even military secrets had to answer to basic human decency eventually. That truth mattered more than security. 20 years after James found the trunk, the story had become legend. Books were written. A movie was made. The Chen Foster Foundation had helped 200 families find answers about disappeared soldiers. Laws had changed. The military was more careful about experiments, more accountable to the people who served. But the most important legacy was simpler. People remembered that 2 young soldiers had trusted their country, had volunteered for an experiment they thought was safe, had been betrayed and abandoned, and 80 years later someone had cared enough to open a trunk and tell their truth. Linda Chen was 98 years old, still sharp, still active, still running the foundation her father's story had inspired. She'd spent 3 weeks with her father after 80 years without him. 3 weeks that had meant everything. She'd learned who he was, heard his voice, felt his hugs. That was more than most children of disappeared soldiers ever got. Robert Foster was 75, retired from teaching but working full-time at the foundation. He'd known his grandfather for 1 week, 7 days that had taught him more about courage and sacrifice than a lifetime of history books. He made sure every school in America could access the soldier's story, made sure no one forgot. The trunk itself was in a museum now, sitting in the Smithsonian, surrounded by the diaries and photograph, a memorial to 2 men who'd existed in an impossible state, who'd waited 80 years to be seen. Millions of people visited it every year, read the diaries, looked at the photograph of 2 young soldiers who'd given everything. The museum also displayed Dr. Walsh's equipment, the machines that had finally made the invisible soldiers visible, that had given them a brief return to normal life before they died. Dr. Walsh had won awards for her work, had advanced science in ways nobody had predicted, but she always said her greatest achievement was simpler, giving 2 trapped souls their freedom, letting them rest after 80 years of imprisonment. The military had learned hard lessons. Every experiment now required independent oversight. Every test subject had full information and real choice. Every soldier who disappeared was searched for seriously, not just buried in classified files. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. The foundation pushed for more, found more forgotten soldiers, more buried secrets, more families who deserved answers. The work continued generation after generation. Linda's children took over the foundation when she died at 99. Robert's grandchildren joined the staff. The Chen and Foster families had turned personal tragedy into public service. But sometimes, late at night in the old storage building at Fort Campbell, strange things happened. Guards reported seeing two figures, young soldiers in old uniforms, transparent, fading, standing by where the trunk used to be. The figures never did anything threatening, never spoke, just stood there watching, waiting, like they couldn't quite let go, like some part of them was still trapped between existing and not existing. The Army investigated, brought in Dr. Walsh's old equipment. The machines detected quantum fluctuations, traces of phase-shifted matter, echoes of two soldiers who'd existed in an impossible state for so long that reality itself remembered them. Dr. Walsh, now 85, studied the readings. This is interesting. Their original quantum signatures are still present, like fingerprints in reality. They're not alive, but they're not completely gone either. They left an imprint, a memory written into the structure of space itself. The guards asked if that was dangerous. Dr. Walsh shook her head. No, just sad. Those two young men existed in an impossible state for so long that the universe can't quite forget them. They'll probably fade completely in another 50 or 100 years. Until then, they're ghosts of ghosts, echoes of something that should never have happened. The Army declared the storage building a memorial site, put up a plaque explaining the story, let people visit who wanted to. Some visitors reported feeling cold spots, seeing movement in corners of their eyes, hearing whispers that might have been wind or might have been voices. Most people said it felt peaceful, like the soldiers weren't trapped anymore, just lingering, saying goodbye slowly, making sure their story wasn't forgotten before they finally faded away completely. Linda's granddaughter, Amy Chen, visited the building every year. She'd never met her great-grandfather. He'd died before she was born, but she'd grown up with his story, had dedicated her life to the foundation that honored him. Amy would stand in the empty building and talk out loud. "Great-grandfather, I hope you can hear me somehow. I hope you know that your story changed things, that hundreds of families got answers because you and William refused to stay invisible, that laws changed, that soldiers are safer now, that your sacrifice meant something." Sometimes visitors swore they saw a figure appear behind Amy when she spoke, a young soldier, faint as morning mist, smiling, then fading away. Amy never saw it herself, but she felt something, a warmth, a presence, like someone was listening, like someone approved. Robert Foster's great-grandson Michael had a similar experience. He was 20 years old, studying history in college, wrote his thesis on the invisible soldiers, spent weeks in the storage building, researching, recording. One night, working late, he felt someone watching him, turned around and saw two figures, transparent, barely there, two young soldiers in old uniforms. They didn't speak, just looked at him, nodded, then faded away. Michael told his family about it. Some believed him, some didn't, but everyone agreed on one thing. If the soldiers' echoes were still around, watching their descendants carry on their legacy, that was fitting. They'd watched the world for 80 years while invisible. Why shouldn't they watch a little longer now that their story was known? Dr. Walsh died at 90. She'd spent 50 years studying quantum physics and reality phase shifting, had won every award science could give, but she always said her real achievement was helping two trapped soldiers. On her deathbed, she told her family something she'd never told anyone else. The night after Thomas and William died, I dreamed about them. They came to me, looking healthy and happy. They thanked me, said they were finally free, said they were going somewhere else, somewhere better. I don't know if it was really them or just my exhausted brain, but it felt real. It felt like goodbye. The foundation continued. The work expanded. Not just military experiments anymore, but all government secrets that affected ordinary people. Truth and accountability became the mission. The Chen and Foster families led it, but thousands of people joined. Veterans, activists, scientists, lawyers, all working to prevent what happened to Thomas and William from happening to anyone else. 50 years after James found the trunk, the story was taught in every school. Children learned about the invisible soldiers, about experiments and ethics, about the importance of questioning authority, about standing up for what was right even when it cost everything. The storage building at Fort Campbell became a pilgrimage site, People came from around the world, left flowers, left letters, some for Thomas and William, some for James Miller, who'd opened the trunk, some for Dr. Walsh, who'd brought the soldiers home, some for Linda and Robert, who'd honored their fathers and grandfather with lifelong dedication. The museum in Washington still displayed the trunk and diaries, but they'd added something new, a hologram display showing Thomas and William, not as invisible echoes but as they'd been in 1945, young and hopeful, smiling, alive with possibility. Before the experiment, before the betrayal, before 80 years of impossible existence, visitors could hear recordings of their voices, read their full diaries, understand not just what happened to them, but who they'd been, real people, sons and husbands and fathers, soldiers who'd volunteered because they thought they were helping their country, who'd paid a price no one should have to pay. The recordings always ended the same way, with Thomas's last words before he died. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired, but I'm grateful too. Grateful that someone finally opened that trunk, finally saw us, finally brought us home. That matters more than all the years of being invisible. Being seen matters. Being remembered matters. Tell people that." And William's last words, "We were soldiers. We did our duty. It's not the duty we expected, not the service we imagined, but we served. For 80 years we served by waiting, by hoping, by refusing to fade away completely until someone found us." That's a kind of courage too. The courage to endure. Tell people that soldiers serve in many ways. Some in combat, some in secret, some by simply surviving the impossible until the truth can be told. Every visitor left understanding something important. That government power came with responsibility. That experiments on human beings required consent and accountability. That truth mattered more than secrecy. That people who served their country deserved honor, not abandonment. 100 years after the experiment, only echoes remained. The people who'd known Thomas and William personally were all dead. Linda, Robert, James, Dr. Walsh, all gone. But their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on. The foundation thrived. The story lived. And sometimes, very rarely, someone in that old storage building would see something. A shimmer, a shadow. 2 young soldiers, transparent as morning mist, standing where the trunk used to be, still watching, still waiting, but not trapped anymore, just lingering, making sure the story stayed alive, making sure no one forgot what happened when good men trusted their country and their country betrayed them. The echoes faded more with each passing year. Scientists said that eventually, the quantum imprints would disappear completely. Thomas and William would be truly gone from reality. No traces, no echoes, just memory. But that was okay, because memory was enough. Memory was everything. As long as people remembered the invisible soldiers, as long as they told the story, as long as they learned the lessons, Thomas Chen and William Foster would never truly disappear. They'd exist in a different way, not as phase-shifted matter trapped between states, but as an idea, a warning, a symbol of courage and sacrifice. And that kind of existence lasted forever. The trunk in the museum stood as a reminder of 2 young soldiers who'd volunteered for an experiment, of 80 years spent invisible and abandoned, of a country that had to learn hard lessons about responsibility and truth, and of the moment when someone finally opened what had been sealed, finally saw what had been hidden, finally brought home what had been lost. That moment mattered. That moment changed everything. And as long as people remembered, those 2 soldiers would never be invisible again.